Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Arbegona Elto Elora station, wash processed Ethiopia from Moby Coffee Roasters. And there's the bag right there. And Moby, based out of Shanghai, China. And this is their first ever appearance on this channel, as they're a coffee roaster I had zero familiarity with going into this review. We picked this coffee up from Airworks as part of their July coffee drop, as it felt like another great opportunity to try out an Asian coffee roaster that we've never reviewed before, in preparation for our eventual Asian coffee roaster tier list. And as always, when trying out a brand new coffee roaster for the first time, we like to review one of their washed and one of their non-washed offerings, with this one acting as the washed representative. So it'll be interesting to see how this one turned out, as this right here is day 47. And interestingly enough, Moby does have a recipe for all of their different coffees on the back of their bags. And we did opt for the recipe that they had for this coffee, which was a 17:1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 98 degrees Celsius, about 208 degrees Fahrenheit. And I like this one best through the Chemex, which does indicate a more medium grind. Roast profile for this coffee, right off the bat, in comparison to some of their contemporaries, we are thinking of Big Sur and Gut & Co. They weren't quite as light as either of those other two coffee roasters. The comparison that Fried Hats did have for Moby in general was that of Fried Hats, which we are actually working on one of Fried Hats' filter offerings. And I can see the comparison given that they are both roasted on the Probat, and I can see them both being a little bit lighter on the spectrum in general. That being said, the Fried Hats coffee, that filter offering, does feel just a slight bit lighter than this one as well. And in comparison to the other Moby coffee that we are reviewing, this one felt lighter than that coffee too. So I'm not necessarily saying that these are the lightest experiences that we've had from Chinese-based coffee roasters, but they still do skew on the slightly more light side of things by most standards and metrics. With all that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. Day 26, first impression through the V60, and the coffee is pretty nice, as it does have a nice level of intensity and sweetness, indicating that it's probably going to be even better from this point going forward. Classic wash processed Ethiopian profile with a lighter body and a more fresh fruit and floral experience, primarily in the citric sense. So for the most part, a pretty direct, straightforward first impression to this coffee. Day 29 through the Chemex, and there was a slight bit of a roast characteristic, and that's a little bit what I'm indicating about this coffee in comparison to that of any of the other Chinese-based coffee roasters that we've reviewed recently, as well as that Fried Hats experiences. It was most prominent and pronounced on this day specifically, and that's when we kept the temperatures, I want to say, a little bit more moderate, which is kind of interesting given that the recipe does indicate pushing this coffee a little bit. Outside of that, there was a slightly metallic quality that can be felt in slightly more developed drum roasted coffees. It wasn't overly prominent, neither of those qualities were, but it did hinder the overall cleanliness of this one, resulting in a less clean experience overall. So this day was a little bit of an anomaly. That's a little bit of a spoiler alert for what's coming ahead, but I was just kind of surprised to see the coffee turn out this way based off of the first impression and based off the expectations we did have for this coffee roaster. Day 32. To the UFO brewer, and the coffee was lacking in terms of any prominent quality, as it does have a slightly generic lemon quality without much intensity behind it. It does improve a little bit as it cools down, but this experience was pretty generic in general, so I didn't have too much to add on this day. Day 35 through the V60 with Moby recipe, and it's kind of funny because going into that day, looking at the recipe, I said, they really want me to push this coffee given the impression that we had when we kept it at a more moderate level extraction, and it's surprisingly impressed, offering significantly more of the floral and citric qualities in line with the listed orange blossom and lemon as well. Significantly less of that previously mentioned roast quality, so it could have been a little bit of an anomaly, that one experience that we did have, but for the most part it was coming out significantly cleaner, so a much better result this time around. Day 38 through the Chemex with Moby recipe, and the coffee is turning out very nice again, as it's offering a very clean floral and citric sense to it that was near reminiscent of Panamanian geishas given the abundance of the listed orange blossom-like qualities. Great intensity and clarity overall, pretty solid day with plenty of wonderful qualities this time around. Day 41 through the V60 with Moby recipe, and the coffee was a little less impressive than the previous days that we had for this one, as this one felt a little bit more generic, citric forward for the most part. Outside of that, it wasn't offering as much of the floral qualities with a bit more of a grapefruit and lemon-like bitterness with a cleaner presentation overall, but maybe not quite in the same manner that we were experiencing on the previous days. Day 44, final notes we have to the Chemex with Moby Dick's recipe, and the coffee was back to being at its best as it's offering a nice level of fruit sweetness in line with the listed citric attributes. If I recall correctly, I think pretty much every note that they have on here is citric in some sense. Florality being presented in both a honeysuckle and jasmine-like sense, as well as the listed citric blossom quality. A bit of stone fruits and toffee giving the coffee some added depth. And now that I'm thinking about that toffee note that I just mentioned, if this one's actually roasted on a Probat, that makes much more sense than I would have expected when I first made these notes and took the information on this coffee, because that is a very common characteristic of Probat coffees, even when it comes to wash-processed Ethiopians. All right, so let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. It is funny that that did just dawn on me, especially now that I'm looking at this tasting wheel as well. That way makes way too much sense. All right, let's go through this tasting wheel. We will start with the cleanliness level 4. Very clean cup of coffee right from the onset. I do have to say that there were some inconsistencies throughout, maybe on the second day, maybe even on the third day. It was on the lower side of level 4, but there were other days where it was on the higher side of level 4. So this coffee was just slightly inconsistent. And one of the frustrating things about working with 100-gram bags of coffees is that we do have to brew in lower dose sizes, and we also have fewer opportunities to take notes. So it could have been a result of that, but for the most part, this coffee just seems to be, for the most part, at that level 4 mark. At times, perhaps a little cleaner, at times a little less so, but level 4 is where it did end up. Finish, level 4. The finish on this one, it does have a little bit of that toffee-like feel outside of these citric qualities, which are most prominent throughout the entirety of this coffee. I mean, right from the onset, we were getting plenty of those citric characteristics. It's a washed Ethiopian coffee, so those are fully expected. But having that additional depth to this one did give it just a little bit more character and feel in this experience. Sweetness, level 4. Pretty sweet for a wash-processed Ethiopian coffee, and even though I'm a massive fan of the Probat, I do have to say that not all wash-processed Ethiopian Probat coffees we've had have come out to be as sweet as the experience of this one was. Main reason I don't enjoy reviewing wash-processed Ethiopian coffees is because they can be a little bit lower on the sweetness. Like if they're a level 3 for sweetness, then it's going to be a very hard selling point to me for me to enjoy those wash-processed Ethiopian coffees. This one did enough in terms of the sweetness, great intensity to it overall, so I'm happy with it being there at the level 4, one of the better attributes of this coffee. Florality, level 4. Mentioned a number of things. Honeysuckle, they have that citric blossom characteristic, and those were, I would say, pretty notable. A little bit of that jasmine characteristic, so Panamanian Geisha light in that sense. And as a result, one of the more enjoyable parts of this coffee for me was the enjoyable floral qualities to this one. Citrus fruit, level 4. A no-brainer going into it. I mean, the entire description of this coffee is citric forward, and the experience of this coffee was consistently citric. When there are qualities that were maybe a little bit absent on certain days, citrus was certainly not one of them, as that seems to be an ever-present quality within this coffee. All right, handful of level 3s. We will start with the acidity level 3. Not the brightest coffee. Definitely didn't expect it to be washed. Ethiopian coffees almost always seem to fall in that level 3 category, most of that coming from the citric aspects of this coffee. Stone fruit, level 3. I think one of the notes they have listed on here is grapefruit, and I've said over and over that I do like looking for coffees that have that grapefruit note because oftentimes they present a little bit more peachy to me, and that was the case with this one, which is one of the main reasons we got a little bit of those peachy characteristics, but it did also come out a little bit bitter as well, which is where the bitterness does come into this tasting wheel. But yeah, we're talking about the stone fruits, a little bit of that peachy quality, enough to push it there to level 3, second most abundant characteristic outside of the abundance of citrus. Caramel, level 3. As mentioned, there's that toffee characteristic to it. It could be a result of this coffee itself, or it could be a result of the fact that this one is roasted on the Probat. That definitely dawned on me when when discussing this coffee and when discussing this tasting wheel, as it's always interesting to me when I see Probat coffees, especially something like this that would very rarely score this high on this tasting wheel, score that level 3, as I really didn't think about it when making this tasting wheel, which makes it much more fun. And then the final thing worth discussing is the body at a level 3. The first experience did indicate that this coffee was going to be a little bit lighter bodied, but as I brewed the final experience, I said, for a wash processed Ethiopian coffee, it does have a little bit more body than I might have expected, and I was making this tasting wheel alongside a couple of other coffees, and I was surprised to see how it compared in terms of the overall body and texture to it. Just a little bit more juicy than I might have expected given what the coffee is, especially given that it was brewed with the Chemex. But level 3, where we opted to put that outside of that, as I'm looking at this tasting wheel, I do think it is a pretty good representation of what I was getting from this coffee. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. This one was solid. I definitely had some more enjoyable days than other when it came to this coffee specifically. And outside of that, I mean, when you're offering a wash processed Ethiopian coffee that has a nice level of intensity, sweetness, florality, the fruit qualities to it, and it's clean enough, then it's going to be a winner for me. And that seems to be the case with this coffee, as I enjoyed it for what it was. And in hindsight, looking back on it and saying that it did offer a lot of Probat-like characteristics to it without ever thinking, like when I was going through this coffee, at no point did I ever think, I'm drinking a Probat coffee. I think I was just much more focused on seeing how it compared to a lot of the other coffees, which I do like Big Sur more based off the experiences that I've had from them. And that's a Loring-based coffee roaster. So that goes to show that I'm not biased against what is probably my preferred roaster, which is the Probat. If a coffee roaster is going to offer a profile of a coffee that I enjoy more, it won't matter as much when it comes to the roasting machine. But for what this coffee was, I thought it was enjoyable. It hit on all the marks that I was looking for when it came to this coffee. And for it being a wash processed Ethiopian coffee, it didn't falter in at least reaching the minimum for what I was looking for within a coffee like this. My biggest gripe is probably that it did seem a little inconsistent at times, but it just could have been a little bit finicky to work with this one and a little bit more citric forward than I probably would have preferred. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to. If you're a fan of Probat coffees, then I feel like this one's a very good representation of what a washed Ethiopian Probat coffee should be like. It can obviously be just a little bit lighter than the experience that we did have from this one, but there were a lot of positives to take away. I mean, great sweetness, great intensity, really nice floral quality to it, and plenty of citric characteristics as well, while still offering that kind of toffee like brown candy characteristic that is abundant in a lot of Probat-based coffees. So that's kind of the best direction I can point somebody towards on this one, and also the best way I can leave this review. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, I'd love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Arbegona Elto Elora station, wash processed Ethiopia from Moby Coffee Roasters. Thank you for watching.